preliminary findings, and this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region. He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said corona incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed, as is common, accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they're dissected and examined, and then they're put back in a bag within inside the body. So when they're buried, their remains will all be with them. But in this occasion, if there's going to be a second autopsy, then the organs are put in the body cavity so the second pathologist could be able to examine the organs as well. Very significant for Dr. Mitchell was that the anterior inner neck structures were absent, not received with the body, and we'll explain that in just a minute. And then it talks about the additional procedures performed during the second autopsy, and we'll go into the paragraphs on that there because he explains it better in his narrative. So where's the first page of the discussion? Not the diagram yet. You can keep the diagram over there. Move this back, Lisa. So he talks in the preliminary discussion opinion. This forensic pathologist identified several limitations during the second autopsy that create barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells. And that's important. He talks about the fact that we didn't get to see the body when it was first recovered, like the medical examiner working for Mississippi would have seen it. He talked about the second autopsy performed on Nolan Wells revealed marked decompensation or changes. Marked decompensation can obscure the presence and absence of bruising on the skin surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. What he's saying, because the body was so decomposed that you couldn't tell if there was bruises or abrasions on the body when he received it on the 10th of July. For these reasons, additional dissection procedures not performed during the first autopsy examination were performed to rule out potential blunt force injuries responsible for the death. These procedures included facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvic, dissection of the subcutaneous and deep soft tissue, dissection of the back, the buttocks, the arms and legs. He did all of this to rule out things. He ruled out there were no fractures or deep tissue injuries identified. This was very important because he wanted to be very thorough and very transparent, because transparency is the key to getting to the answers of why Nolan Wells is not with us. So he did that there and was very straightforward, very open, very open. He says, however, dissection of the back of the head during the layered posterior neck dissection revealed a 12 by 8 inch focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlaying the occipital bone. And he talked about how he found red discoloration when he cut open into the back of his head towards the occipital bone, and he saw the red discoloration, and we actually saw the pictures of it. It's significant. You can't help but notice, why is this dark red here in the back of his head? And so he was important to note that in his report. He said that etiology of this finding is unclear. There are no lacerations of the overlaying skin nor fractures of the underlying skull. These findings are inconclusive for perimortem injury due to both the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries. This finding, however, is significant enough to be highlighted in this preliminary report for further investigation. It is important to reiterate that the finding could not have been observed in the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection were not performed. He said another limitation, move this back here. Another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body. So he's saying that the throat was not received with the body when he got Nolan Wells' body in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. And so let's discuss that with what he said about that. He said, it is assumed that the initial pathologist retained these structures for additional evaluation. He said the retention of the anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a common forensic pathology practice. He was chief medical examiner for 7 years in Washington, D.C., and he said that if they had concern about throat or any fracture or compression of the throat, they too will hold them back. He doesn't know why they held the throat back, but he said the throat was not with the body of Nolan Wells when he received it in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. He said, nevertheless, a posterior neck dissection performed without review of the anterior neck structures is incomplete. Therefore, this pathologist cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. He said he would need to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency.
If you are watching this for the first time and you care about justice, about accountability, and about the truth, make sure you subscribe to Unrivaled True Crime right now and hit that like button. This channel is committed to bringing you the full story, documented and factual, on cases that demand attention and refuse to be forgotten. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The Mississippi Medical Examiner conducted the initial autopsy following the recovery of Nolan's body. Standard procedures were followed: a coronal incision of the scalp, brain removal, the Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and the removal, dissection, and examination of the internal organs. The organs were not bagged and placed back inside the body cavity in the typical manner following a final autopsy. Instead, they were left accessible, which indicated that further examination was anticipated. But there was something the initial autopsy did not include. There was no posterior head and neck dissection performed. That specific absence would later prove to be one of the most critical omissions in the entire case. And there was something else, something that, when revealed, stopped everyone in that press conference room cold. When Nolan Wells's body was transported to Washington, D.C. for a second independent autopsy, it arrived without his anterior internal neck structures. The trachea, the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone, the structures of the throat, were not received with the body. They had been retained by the initial pathologist in Mississippi. Retaining those structures during an initial autopsy is not inherently unusual. Forensic pathologists sometimes hold them back for additional examination, particularly when there is a reason to look more closely at the throat. But when a second pathologist receives a body without those structures and is never given access to them, an enormous and potentially irreplaceable gap opens up in the investigation. That second pathologist was Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a forensic pathologist who served as chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C. for 7 years and is one of the most credentialed voices in the field. The family of Nolan Wells commissioned Dr. Mitchell to conduct an independent review, and what he found, and what he could not find, changed the trajectory of this case entirely. Dr. Mitchell received the body on July 10, 2026. By that point, the body had undergone what the report describes as marked decompensation, significant decomposition. That level of deterioration creates real barriers for any examiner attempting a second autopsy. Bruising on the skin surface becomes nearly impossible to detect. Subtle injuries that would have been visible closer to the time of death may no longer be observable. Dr. Mitchell acknowledged these limitations openly and transparently in his preliminary report. But transparency also meant doing more, not less. To rule out the possibility of blunt force injuries, Dr. Mitchell performed additional dissection procedures that the first autopsy never included: facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvis, the subcutaneous and deep soft tissues, the back, the buttocks, the arms, and the legs. He examined Nolan Wells's body with extraordinary thoroughness. He found no fractures anywhere in the body. He found no deep tissue injuries consistent with blunt force trauma in most areas he examined. But then he reached the back of the head. During the layered posterior neck dissection, Dr. Mitchell discovered a focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlying the occipital bone, the bone at the back of the skull. The area measured 12 centimeters by 8 centimeters. Photographs were taken. Those who viewed those photographs in the press conference described the discoloration as unmistakable and deeply concerning. There was no laceration on the overlying skin. There was no fracture of the underlying skull. But that red discoloration was there, sitting in the deep tissue of the back of Nolan Wells's head, demanding an explanation that no one could yet provide. Dr. Mitchell was direct in his report. The etiology of that finding was unclear. Due to the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries, the finding was inconclusive for perimortem injury, meaning it could not be definitively confirmed as having occurred around the time of death. But it was significant enough that he highlighted it specifically in his preliminary report and called for further investigation. He also noted something that carries enormous weight. That finding could not have been observed during the first autopsy. because the posterior head and neck dissection was never performed. Whatever caused that red discoloration in the back of Nolan Wells's head, the initial autopsy was never positioned to find it. And then there was the question of the missing throat. Without the anterior neck structures, Dr. Mitchell stated plainly that he could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributing factor or cause of death. He stated that a posterior neck dissection performed without review of the anterior structures is fundamentally incomplete. He requested access to those retained structures from the Mississippi medical examiner so that his examination could be completed properly. Beyond the neck, there were other questions the second autopsy simply could not answer. Because the organs had already been dissected during the first autopsy, Dr. Mitchell could not directly observe whether there was water in the airway, a critical indicator in any suspected drowning case. He could not observe the stomach contents, which would have helped establish a timeline of Nolan's last hours. And as of the date of his preliminary report, the toxicology results from the initial autopsy had still not been released or provided to him. Dr. Mitchell's conclusion, issued on July 19, 2026, was clear and carefully worded. The cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells was undetermined, pending further investigation, and in language that became the center of everything that followed, he stated that he could not rule out whether any intervening non-natural factors contributed to or caused Nolan's death. He could not rule out foul play. 7 outstanding questions were identified in his report: the circumstances that led to Nolan entering the water, the documented body position at recovery, whether there was water in the airway, whether the neck structures showed any evidence of injury, whether there was any intracranial hemorrhaging, what the stomach contents revealed, and what the toxicology results would ultimately show. The family and their advocates stood before the public and demanded that the Mississippi medical examiner cooperate fully, releasing photographs, sharing findings from the initial examination, and granting Dr. Mitchell access to the retained throat structures. They called on the district attorney to present Dr. Mitchell's findings before a grand jury so that every piece of relevant evidence could be heard and evaluated. Christine and Elmore Wells did not stand at that podium to make accusations they could not support. They stood there because their son was found face down in water on the 4th of July, because a second autopsy found an unexplained wound in the back of his head that the first autopsy never looked for, because his throat arrived missing, and because the nation's forensic experts cannot yet say with certainty how or why Nolan Xavier Wells died. The case remains open, the questions remain unanswered, and the Wells family remains committed to getting every single one of them answered. This story is not over. There is more to come as this case continues to develop, and Unrivaled True Crime will be here to bring you every verified update as it emerges. If this coverage matters to you, please subscribe to Unrivaled True Crime and leave a like on this video. Your support keeps this work going and ensures these stories are never buried in silence. Nolan Xavier Wells deserves answers. His family deserves truth, and the pursuit of both continues.